All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Sean Evanson Shanley, Director of Residential Operations with Veridient. And in 2017 through 2018, Veridient conducted a field study in Virginia to determine how effectively the energy code is being implemented in the field by residential builders. We focused on new construction single-family homes, and today I'll share what we learned and the next steps. And after the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that's going to contain a link to a survey. The info from that survey is going to be used to help us develop training resources, so we hope that you'll take a few minutes to fill that out. And just some logistics before we get started. You are all muted, and I'm going to hold questions until the end. This will take about 15 to 20 minutes to get through the main content, and then I'll open the floor to questions. And when we do that, you can either raise your hand and I'll be able to unmute you and you can ask a question, or you can type in your questions. So the main question that this field study sought to answer was just how much energy does a typical new construction home use compared to what it would use if it was built 100% in compliance with the state energy code, and essentially trying to determine what is the potential for energy savings. And this study was conducted in Virginia, as I mentioned, and there were also similar ones conducted in a number of other states. And this work was all funded by the Department of Energy Building Energy Codes program. And what we'll talk about today was focused on the residential side of things. I also did some studies around the commercial side of things. So the purpose of this, the main goal was to assist states with measuring their energy code compliance, figure out what areas weren't in 100% compliance, and highlight some focus areas for future education and training initiatives. And so this was divided into 3 phases. The first phase was what we completed in Virginia in 2017 and 2018. And this was essentially determining a baseline for compliance and getting out into the field and looking at some key measures to determine what was being implemented correctly and what wasn't. And then phase 2 is based off of the findings from phase 1, determining what areas have the greatest potential for savings if builders were implementing those 100% accurately in the field. And based off that, get out there and provide training and education to builders and other subcontractors. And then phase 3 would be to, after the training was all done, be to get back out into the field to attempt to quantify the impact that those educational efforts had by essentially repeating phase 1. So getting back into another batch of houses to see how closely to 100% the energy code was being implemented. And so today we'll just talk about phase 1, which focused on single-family detached new construction homes. So as I mentioned, this study was funded by the Department of Energy. In Virginia, it was administered by the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, or SEIA. They also administered similar studies in several other southeastern states, and Veridient was one who implemented it in the field in Virginia. Pacific Northwest National Labs is going to analyze the data. They're currently in the process of doing that, and we anticipate that they'll be releasing their full findings in 2019. The findings that we're sharing today are preliminary findings based off of analysis of the data by both Veridient and SEIA. And the success of this study did greatly benefit from the support of DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Home Builders Association of Virginia, the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, and also the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council. So in terms of the process, we weren't just getting out there and getting into random homes. Essentially, DOE and PNNL provided us a list of 29 jurisdictions around the state that they wanted us to collect data from, and also indicated how many data sets we were supposed to collect in each jurisdiction. And those 2 things, the jurisdictions and how many data sets, were based off of census data and also the number of permit starts. Thanks to help from DHCD and the building departments in those 29 jurisdictions, we were able to get a list of open single-family new construction permits, and then generated a random list from those and started working our way through it. And this largely involved randomly showing up at homes, cold calling. HBAV was kind enough to send out an email to their members letting them know about the study. and then lots more cold calling. And this was definitely the most challenging aspect of the study, was trying to maintain the integrity and keep the process random, but also get access to those homes. And the data that we were collecting was what you see there. We're looking at insulation for the foundation, walls, and ceilings, window values, envelope tightness, which we measured through lower door testing, total duct leakage, which we did through duct leakage testing, and then looking at the percentage of high efficacy lighting installed. And we were tasked with collecting 63 instances of each of those. Obviously, it's not possible to collect all of that data in a single home. So we broke up inspections into what we call the pre-drywall and a final phase. And we would collect whatever data we could at that phase, but then we didn't revisit that home to collect any additional data. So overall, we ended up collecting data from 135 homes around the state. When you look at all the data in aggregate and piece together what the average home looked like, you can see the stats there. Some of you are probably thinking that that's a pretty large home, larger than you might expect. And that's largely because the typical foundation that we encountered was a heated basement. So that square footage was counted in the total, but that wasn't counted in the total number of stories. Total number of stories is just above grade stories. All right, so getting into the results, we'll start first with foundations. As I mentioned, the predominant type that we encountered was heated basements. We saw those in 67 of the 135 homes. And those were typically insulated either with fiberglass blankets or had framed out walls with fiberglass bats. We saw very few unheated basements, only 2 of those in the whole study. Then vented crawls, we saw more than we had anticipated. We saw those in 28 of the homes. And the notable thing from those is that it is really difficult to get a good quality installation with vented crawls. As you can see in the photo, almost right away, those bats start falling down. So it's tough to get a quality install from that. Then with the unvented crawls, we saw fewer of those than we had hoped to, only 12 in the study. And by and large, the insulation quality in those was fine because it was either foam board or spray foamed insulation. Slabs were a tricky area to address. As I mentioned, the 2 phases that we were getting out into the field were pre-drywall and final. Obviously, you can't see slab insulation at either of those phases, so we had to make separate trips at slab pour to go and see the insulation levels. And we're only able to accomplish that in 5 homes in a specific geographic area of the state. And what we did see was, in all cases, those homes were not meeting code. We saw just a single layer of R4 styrofoam being used instead of the R10 that's required by code. But again, that was a very limited sample set, so we don't want to draw any conclusions from that. And that is another thing worth mentioning, is that the results that we found were from a single snapshot in time. We didn't have any insight into what may have already been failed by a code inspector and awaiting correction. So getting into walls, the insulation levels were all compliant with code, so that was great to see. So the main issue, which isn't directly addressed by code, is the quality of the installation of that insulation. You can see that a sizable number were not grade 1. Grade 1 is what we consider the manufacturer's recommended install. Basically, if you're not getting a grade 1, you're not getting what you paid for. So we were hoping to see slightly better quality, but wasn't too terrible. We only had 3 grade 3 installations, which you can see an example of in that picture to the right, where you've got a lot of compression and voids in the installation. Ceilings, we saw much better quality, and that was largely because we saw a lot of blown insulation. When the insulation's blown, it's a lot easier to get a consistent quality install. We did, with bats, have a lot more hit or miss quality. You can see in that photo that a trade had come in after the fact and pulled out a bat and never replaced it, so there was that void in the insulation. In terms of R value, what we did see was compliant with code. Windows, we were really pleased across the board, with one exception. Those were exceeding code, usually pretty significantly. So we were happy with that. There was really just that one home that had poor windows, which hopefully got replaced because they were pretty far shy of code. And with the SHGC, we saw the same thing. So overall, 98.6 of all of the homes in the sample set had windows in compliance. And then before we get into the really interesting stuff, we'll just touch off on the lighting, the high efficacy lighting. So code requires that 50% of the installed lighting is high efficacy. And so we saw 80.9% of all the homes having at least half of their fixtures as high efficacy. And it was very encouraging to see that almost half of them had 100% high efficacy lighting. So getting into the tested results, this is where it starts to get interesting. Currently, code does not require a blower door test on homes, and that won't be required under the 2015 code that's going to take effect in September of next year. So we were pleased with the number of homes that were in compliance for something that's currently just verified by a visual inspection. So it was, 78% of the homes meeting code just based off of visual inspection. So we were pleased to see that. Duct leakage was the biggest red flag in the whole study. For this, there are a lot of homes that were not in compliance. You can see we've got two lines up there, a 4% and a 6%. Currently, code requires no more than 6 CFM of leakage, duct leakage per 100 square feet of conditioned floor area. So everything that is to the left of that was in compliance, everything to the right was not. And there's clearly a large amount of data to the right. And we had results going all the way up to 50% duct leakage, which was a little bit higher than we expected. So that of those homes tested, 74% were over that 6 CFM per 100 square foot threshold. There is currently an exemption for air handlers and ductwork that are 100% in conditioned space, and that would drop the failure rate down to 63%. When looking at the upcoming code, the 2015 code, that's going to move from the current visual inspection to a mandatory duct blaster test. And so this is where our biggest concern comes in, because in addition to requiring a duct blaster test with the new version of the code, it's also making the amount of duct leakage more stringent. So that's where that 4% line comes in. Only 4 CFM per 100 square feet of conditioned floor area will be allowed. And you can see just how few duct systems were able to meet that. So if you were looking at that, to 94% of the systems were over that upcoming 4 CFM per 100 square feet threshold. And again, if you apply that exemption for all the ductwork and air handlers being within conditioned space, that drops the failure rate down to 84%, but that's still very significant. When you look at all of the data, it was an average of almost 13 CFM per 100 square feet, which is over 3 times higher than the 2015 code will allow. And so this is where we're hoping to get input from builders and HVAC contractors, and we've been in the process of sharing this data with energy code inspectors, with builders, and with HVAC contractors, just to give them a heads up about, what they should be expecting when the 2015 code comes into effect in September. And so we are hoping to do educational efforts in 2019 to all 3 of those groups, builders, HVAC contractors, and code officials, to let them know what to look out for, best practices, and how they can attempt to get duct leakage below that 4 CFM or bring all of their ductwork and air handlers into conditioned space. So we do hope that you'll fill out that survey that'll go out after the webinar to give us some more insight into how we can best provide those educational efforts. So just a quick recap on what we did find. As I mentioned, duct leakage was our largest area of noncompliance, and envelope tightness was our second highest, but we were still fairly pleased with that just because it is a visual inspection. Lighting was just under 20% non-compliant, and windows were almost 100% compliant. And as I mentioned, the slab edge insulation was 100% non-compliant, but with it being such a small sample set, we're not going to read too far into that. So in terms of potential energy savings, which is really the main goal of this study, is determine what areas should be provided education to attempt to increase compliance. Ductwork is definitely number 1. Building envelopes would be number 2, and that's probably going to be an easier area to increase compliance over ductwork. High efficacy lighting, again, that's a fairly easy one to increase compliance with. And then higher quality insulation, which is really educating both builders and the installation subs on, making sure that they get the manufacturer's recommendations met when they do their installs. So in terms of next steps for Verdiant and SEIA in this, we are in the process of sending out those surveys. We've gotten a good chunk already returned, and we'd love to get some more. So we're going to use that to, in December and January, really identify the future education needs, put together a training plan, and create any additional resources that might be needed. And then ideally, we're hoping to receive funding to do that 2019 training and hear back about that in January, and then kick off those efforts. And then we're definitely looking forward to that PNNL report being released, hopefully early in Q1, to quantify those potential savings and really put some numbers to what increased code compliance could mean for Virginia. So with that, I will go ahead and open it up to questions. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you, or feel free to type some questions in, and I can answer those questions for you. All right. See one question. Peter, go ahead.
Hi, Sean. We exchanged an email or two, I think, after the session you did last week. But I guess my question is related to the windows. I assume that what you found was, or what you qualified was storm windows and double pane and triple pane worked equally well, and for the houses you looked at, they were working pretty well, evidently.
Right. So since this was new construction, we didn't really encounter any storm windows. What we saw was, for the most part, standard double pane vinyl windows, and those were, for the most part, also ENERGY STAR rated. So because they were new construction windows, we didn't really see any storm windows put in. But you are right that for existing homes that might be deciding between, upgrading to vinyl windows versus adding a storm to an existing wood framed window, single pane, those typically perform about the same.
Okay, and kind of a related question. After you finish this, it looks like you're going to try to get everything done by the end of 2019 with the results and measurement. The training you're doing, is that going to be primarily for builders?
It's going to be for builders, HVAC contractors, probably a smaller effort for installation subs, and then also code officials who inspect for the energy code.
Okay, sounds very good. I'm a realtor, and there was a builder today that gave a presentation on some houses being built up here, and I asked him about HERS ratings, and he really wasn't that familiar with it. He said, yeah, I'm familiar with it, but we really don't promote that. And hopefully the training will get more builders engaged in publicizing and striving for good HERS ratings.
Hopefully, and in the 2015 code, there is a new pathway for compliance, which is called the ERI, which is the Energy Rating Index, and that will make use of a HERS index to demonstrate compliance with the energy code. So that will be a new pathway that builders are able to explore.
Great. Very interesting, and good luck with your study coming up.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Again, you can either raise your hand or you can type in a question. All right, it doesn't look like we have any others just yet. I'll give people just another minute to either raise their hand or type in. Okay, well, it looks like that is all for today. Again, thank you everyone for joining. We will send out a follow-up email, and if there's anybody else that you think that this information should be shared with, please let us know. We're trying to get this in front of relevant audiences as quickly as we can, just to give them a heads up, because we want to make that transition to the 2015 code as smooth as possible. All right, thank you.